I just felt that we should continue on because we're at a very important juncture, and we're probably not going to tackle this subject for a while, so we might as well understand it properly and become skilled at doing it. I'm just going to say to you, being a person who knows how to negotiate, which is what any conversation in life is really, it's a negotiation for what you want, they want, and how do we find the outcome that benefits everybody. And that's not a trait you inherit because you were born. It's not a natural thing, but it is a skill that you must develop, and I must develop and master in life if we want to be successful, whether it's in business, home, family, the world, wherever we are. The ability to negotiate and the ability to deal with conflicts is at the very, very top. Now, we all know now that the USA and Israel have launched strikes against Iran's government because it's killed hundreds of thousands of people, 100,000 Americans, Israelis, its own people. And so despite, you would have seen this week, right, all the negotiations going on to see whether they could avert what was coming. And the amazing thing for the Iranians is for 46 years, they've averted what's happening right now across those skies through their ability to obfuscate, defer, pretend to negotiate, etc., and it's come to the end, right? Now, it's not a lack of desire that brought it to the end. Maybe the foreign minister or the guy that was negotiating wanted there to be peace, but he didn't have the ability to make that call. And even though there was desire to bring it to a conclusion that would be peaceful, there were a lot of things in the way that stopped that. And I'm sure there were Iranian officials that wanted a deal, and there were those that didn't want the deal, and the ones who didn't want the deal reigned supreme. And so now we're in the middle of a peacemaking activity. Some wouldn't see it that way, but that's the intention, as I see it, is to bring peace to that region once and for all that has seen so many people killed, so much terrorism come out of that place in the Middle East, and it's now happening by force. We're going to bring force to bring peace is the mantra of the United States and of Israel, and other countries have also been bombed now who are jumping into the fray because they're sick and tired of how the Middle East has been as well. And you watch. I believe what's going to happen if this runs successfully, that there'll be the Abraham Accords and all the things that were established before really go into action, and it might be quite incredible how it all turns out. That's what we want to pray for, right? But that negotiation resulted in an outcome that wasn't a good outcome, especially for Iran, but for anybody, because it puts everybody in danger. And so why does that matter? Why does what's happening in the world stage matter? Because it's a look into how our lives are in families and in our relationships and in our friendships. You know, sometimes a person across the table say they want peace, but they can't deliver it. Sometimes they're not ready and won't tell you. Sometimes years of unresolved hurt have calcified into a posture that looks like engagement, but isn't, and you can have all the desire in the world and still not break through. That's why you can't just have passion and desire and a longing to see a breakthrough. You must understand the 4 Ps that I'm going to talk about to you today. Now, I've dealt with a lot of conflicts in my life. I don't think I'm an unusually conflict-ridden kind of person. I just think that's what life is. If you have a plan, if you have a desire to push forward in your life, you will get opposition. The Bible tells us that. So that in the middle of all that, there have been conflicts, and in the early days, I was not very good at handling those conflicts because I would go really, really quiet, and I would just try to keep peace, And then it'd get to a point where I'd had enough. And once I reached that point, my wick is this long. But when we get to the end of that wick, it's boom, right? And that's just how I am. That's my nature. Tolerant, 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 bang. That's not necessarily bringing a good outcome either, right? But I was so scared of conflict, I had to get angry enough to raise it. Make sense? I didn't like conflict, so I avoided conflict until I was mad, so mad that it forced me to have the conversation. And so I've got better at it, not because I'm mad all the time. I just got better at doing it when I'm not angry, right? You've got to be careful. You can't have conflict resolution when you're angry. All you end up with is annihilation or brokenness. So, at the beginning, I was hopeless, but what I decided, I realized I'm hopeless. Some work out just by themselves, but I'm hopeless. I actually have to develop some skills. It's not a talent, it's a skill to learn how to be a negotiator that resolves conflicts in your life. And for some of us that think, well, I can't be bothered with that, well, good luck, have a great life. But I want to say, if you want to have success in all of your relationships, you have to learn to be quiet. First, make sure you become a student of conflict resolution. They should be teaching this as a degree in college, honestly. They should be teaching this as a degree or a year in primary or elementary school and high school. The most important skill you're going to need in life, other than to love someone, is to resolve conflicts. It is everywhere all the time, from small to big. If you've got teenagers, it's every day. Right? Because everything's in flux, moving. There's a shift going on. And every time there's a shift, there is conflict. Every time two rivers merge, which is like a man and a woman getting married, two rivers merge, there's always turbulence at the merge. There always is. How do we get past that? How do we not react like our parents reacted? Here's what we do. I tell you, I know this, I've counseled so many thousands of people over the last 40 years. What happens is that we take what we were taught, what we saw at home, how we saw conflicts resolved, and maybe on the surface they seem like they're resolved. No, someone just gave up and just tried to keep the peace. But we think, okay, that's the way to resolve the conflict. We can't help it but to draw from our family of origin, our skill set to deal with today's conflict. And that will get you into all kinds of trouble if you're not careful. So, there's a very fascinating statistic that I read this week, that the FBI in 1973 changed their entire approach for how they handled hostage scenarios. Because in 1973 there was a botched hostage situation which left a lot of people dead, and so they stopped and they asked this question: why did that go wrong? Have you ever asked that question about your marriage, about your children, about your friends, young adults, about your colleagues at work, whatever it might be? Have you asked, why did that go wrong? I think I did everything right. Well, if it went wrong, you didn't. Right? Unless that person is the Ayatollah. Here's the point. So the officers wanted to save lives. They were passionate. They were committed. But the instincts they brought into the room, the instincts of force, speed, control, made everything worse. And so in 1973, they rebuilt the whole FBI program in America from scratch. They stopped sending in officers with guns and started sending in negotiators with a completely different set of skills. Not how to overpower, but how to listen, how to slow down, how to build trust with someone who is in crisis. Who's ever heard of Chris Voss, right? He was a very famous FBI hostage negotiator. And he says the number one mistake in any high-stakes conversation is going too fast. Put up your hand if you like to get things overdone quickly. Right, slow down. Right? Going too fast kills people. Going too fast makes destruction. And this is what the FBI discovered, that they can have all the passion, all the desire, But there were people who are dying because of that passion, because it's about going slow. His exact words were this: slow it down. Slow it down. Because speed in conflict destroys the very thing you're trying to build. And most of us do one of two things. We avoid conflict or go in at full speed. Right? All guns blazing. Every instinct we've built up over a lifetime, fighting the way we watched our parents fight, reacting the way we always react, dragged straight into the most important relationships we have. Last week I talked about watering the soil. That I can go in and have a conversation, but if it falls on hard ground, it's just going to be useless. I've got to water the soil in order for seeds of change and conflict resolution to happen. And so today I want to go a little bit further about this, because watered soil is not enough if you don't know how to plant. I've watered the soil, but then the conversation, which is meant to resolve it all, messes it all up. Slow it down. Not avoid it, slow it down. Not more force, not more speed, slow it down, okay? So I want you to write that down in your Bible app notes, slow it down. Okay, speed in conflict always destroys the thing that we're wanting to build. Now, I want to go deeper, because here's the thing: good intentions are not a strategy. Have we got that screen up on there? There we go. Good intentions are not a strategy. Conflict resolution is a skill that has to be mastered. I want you to get this. You need a master's degree in conflict resolution. You can't be a grade 7, seventh grader, or a fifth grader going into a conflict resolution. You'll blow it. It'll fail. You have to be a master, a PhD in conflict resolution. What does that mean? I've got to understand how people respond to words that are said, and how personalities are different to other personalities, and why it works at work doesn't work at home. There have been times in our marriage, Jane will say, "I'm not one of your employees." And I'd say, "Technically you are, actually." No. She'd say, "I'm not one of your employees. Stop talking to me like I'm an employee." Fair enough. Bang. It was deserved, because I was treating her like an employee. Because you come home and that's still the same mode, right? Bang, I'm used to telling you what to do, how to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then I come home and I start doing it, she reacts. And so she should. I'm not one of your kids. I had a lady write to me the other day, and not from our church, it was an outside project, and her manner was so aggressive and so patronizing that I wrote back to her, "Hey, just want to push back gently. I'm neither your child, your husband, or your subordinate." And then I decided to delete it before I said it. And if I had my Selah app, I would have asked, "Should I send this message?" It would say, "No, don't send that message." Because sometimes you just want to tell them, back off. Disrespectful. So I sent a very different one that was gentle. And she still took 5 days to respond. And then she apologized. See, that was the goal. The other one was just to cause a conflict, right? So I wanted her to know, "Do you know who I am? I'm your customer." But I didn't say that either. So these are all the fantasies you have, you know. I would have told them this, let's do that. That's good. Fantasize, get off the fantasy kind of ride and start dealing with reality, because you want a result. When you think in the light of day, your mind analytically and logically doesn't want to inflame a conflict. So learn, right? Good intentions are not a strategy. Conflict resolution is a skill that has to be mastered. And so I want to talk to you today, because I decided I was going to do the 7 personas today, but I decided we're not ready for that. We're going to do that next week. And that is this. I want to talk to you about how you get to be readied. How do you ready yourself? I'm not going to give you the usual, cliches. I'm trying to give you something new and fresh to put into your mind of how we need to be ready. And I'm going to take you to Bible, because I think when we understand the Word of God, we have a greater pressure on us to do the right thing. Otherwise, it's Pastor Ashley's philosophy. Well, I don't agree with that. Well, Try saying that to Jesus when you talk about his word. Let's have that. It goes this. Most people think conflict is the enemy. It's not. Bad conflict is the enemy. There's a kind of conflict that destroys relationships, and there's a kind of conflict that saves them. The difference isn't whether you fight, it's whether you know what you're doing before you start. So we need to know ourselves. That's why one of the habits I do these days is, once I overcame my fear, I went back to being how I was before all the abuse in my life and those things, and I suddenly started realizing I react quickly. That's my temperament, to react quickly. In the old days, I react slowly, but now I react quickly. So when I went to send that email message back to that woman who'd sent me 2 of those messages, I go, Ashley, whenever you do this, you've done this before, it doesn't end well. So I leave it to overnight, and when I come back in the morning and I read what I wrote, I go, ooh, was I going to send that? But my emotional heat thought that was a very mild message. The cold light of day, I'm like, whoa, that was a 9.5 out of 10. That was a missile. So I've learned to hold my response till I've thought through it in a big, big way, okay? So we're going to go to Matthew 18, and I'm not going to put all of it up on the screen, but if you go to the Bible app I've just sent you, you can look up Matthew chapter 18 and read along in whatever translation you want. You can even read it in Hebrew and Greek. So Matthew 18 is the famous chapter that people use parts of for their conflict process. But I'm going to show you today that those conflict processes are not right when they're separated from the context of the chapter. Because when Jesus was writing, Jesus was talking about these things, he wasn't giving it to us in bite size. Well, this is important, and that's not attached to this. No, it's all attached. Context matters. Otherwise, you'll get all kinds of mess ups, right? So, Matthew 18 talks about, it starts off saying, the disciples called Jesus over and said, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? This is about, position and all those things. And what does Jesus do? He pulls out a little child and he says, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is this little child. Now, the Amplified Bible says, this little child, because they are loving, trusting, and forgiving. Everybody say it. Loving, trusting, and forgiving. And Jesus says, right at the beginning of this conflict resolution chapter, he says, the greatest person who ever takes on conflict is a child. We've seen it. Who's seen little children have a conflict and make up? It's a lot better than adults, right? So let's put up that thing. So the first attitude we've got to have in Matthew 18 is the attitude of a child. Okay? The loving, trusting, and forgiving child. Have you noticed a child get mad but then forget it all? Because they haven't got stacks of history. They're just like, and they hug that person, they hug that kid quickly, right? Here's my question. Is that how you make up? Can you make up that quickly? Answer is no. But Jesus is pulling us back to an attitude at the very beginning of Matthew 18. You've got to read it in context, otherwise you're going to create all kinds of outcomes that aren't intended in the Bible. First, he says, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is those that love, that trust, and forgive. If you don't forgive, you don't trust, and you don't love, you're not great in the kingdom of heaven, is what Jesus is saying. Don't blame me, blame Jesus. He said it, that's what constitutes greatness. The ability to forgive, the ability to retrust, the ability to re-love. You notice they don't hang on. Those kids don't hang on to the squabble they just had. They move on. They figure a way out, right? That's how that works. So, Matthew 18:15 says, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault. Now, we think that means that we're meant to go and say, you did this and blah, 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 blah. That's not what that verse is saying, and that's not what the chapter is saying. The chapter is talking about resolving conflict, both in our lives but in the church. How do we resolve conflict in our communities? Well, This one is not someone that you don't like, it's about someone who's made a sin against you. Let me give you an example. Someone who gossips about you, slanders you, that's a sin. Someone who doesn't want to hang around with you is not a sin, right, per se, unless they do something, etc., etc. So you have to figure out what that is. Now, I remember just about 5 months ago, I went into another situation, wasn't here, wasn't in the state of Georgia, it was another place, and I'd heard someone had been slagging my name around. That's an Australian saying. They'd been gossiping and slandering my name. For what? You don't even know me. But it was affecting one of our campuses. So, after March prayer, and then I reached out tenderly, said, hey, I'd like to catch up with you, if we could. And they said, okay. They had no idea what they were in for, I can tell you. And so in this particular case, this stranger to me, I'd met them once, but this stranger to me was gossiping around town about me, about our church, but about me, put me into it. Now, he didn't mean to, but he did. So we finally caught up. He told me I needed half an hour. We ended up being there for an hour and a half. And I just said, we've met before. I just want to ask you a really simple question. So don't do this in all your relationships. This is with a stranger, right, who says they're a Christian. So I said, I just want to know, why are you slandering my name? Why are you gossiping about me? What is it about me that you think you can tell other people bad things about? And, where's the basis of it? I'm not meaning to, I said, okay, so you're not slandering. So he says, but slander's intentional. Okay, so you didn't intend it, then it's just terrible gossip. Is that right? So, well, they're about the same in the Bible. One was unintentionally. If you kill me accidentally or kill me on purpose, I'm still dead. So I want to ask. So he was obfuscating, whatever. But by the end of the hour and a half, he had repented and asked for my forgiveness, then called me up. He was trying to dodge around a whole bunch of things. But in the end, it was fantastic, right? Because my name and who I am as a person matters. And I'll protect that for the sake of the people. Does it make sense? And for the sake of that campus. If there was no campus there, I would just let it go. But he had sinned. That's a sin. That's different. Okay, then I don't like that person's personality. Very, very different. Okay, but let's talk about I'm looking at the time. Talk about the 4 attitudes. You ready? The first attitude is the attitude of a child, right? And so in Matthew 18, 2-4, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. Truly I tell you, unless you change, listen to what it says, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You'll never get all that stuff, right? Whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest. And that word lowly I don't like that much, but it's amplified. It means to be loving, trusting, and forgiving. Forgives easily, trusts easily. Don't children forgive easily, trust easily? Now they get to a certain age where that starts to change, but in their 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, easy to forgive, easy to move on, and they don't hold things, they just keep moving on. Okay? Because a child doesn't walk into a room calculating. Just walks into a room and doesn't enter the conversation already building the counter argument. A child comes in open, trusting, willing to be wrong, willing to forgive, willing to be forgiven. And that's what Jesus said we have to bring into our conflicts. If we don't go into our conflicts like a child, we're not doing great things. Okay? First attitude, the attitude of the child. Because the whole point of Matthew 18 is reconciliation. The whole point is reconciliation. Okay? Now, the second attitude that Jesus talks about is the attitude of a shepherd. Because in Matthew 18, 12-13, right? He's the shepherd. And the shepherd's mentality is that sheep is worth finding no matter what. Now, remember, it's talking about the 99 sheep and going to find the one. But in the context of Matthew 18, it's talking about conflicts. So who's the one that's missing? The one that's been hurt. The one that's had conflict against them. So he says the shepherd, won't he leave the 99 and go find the one that's missing? The one that's missing is the one that's been hurt. The one that's been damaged, he will go find that sheep at all costs because they're worth finding no matter what. That's how we got to fight for our children, fight for our families, fight for our marriages, fight for our church, fight for our connect groups. We've got to be a shepherd that says I'm going to be the attitude of a child, that I've got no axe to grind, I've got no arguments in the back of my head. I'm not trying to set you up, I'm not trying to get you. I'm going as a child that wants to love, trust, and forgive, and I'm going to be a shepherd that pursues that person until I find them. I will not give up. But again, my goal is not to smack the sheep on the head. You bad sheep. No, that's not what it is. It's about bringing the sheep back to the fold in his arms. Make sense? So then, let's read that verses, okay? Matthew 18 says, if a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than the 199 that did not wander off. Here's the thing, we can't pursue conflict resolution as whatever. No, they've got to be more important. That resolve needs to be more important than all the other things you're doing. If you want to be a child who's great in the kingdom of heaven. There are a lot of people that are less than great in the kingdom of heaven, that's for sure. But if we want to be great, which I know we do, all of us want to, then we have to follow the Bible. Matthew 18 is filled with all of these steps designed to let us know how we need to be before we attack the situation. Make sense? Before we go to the person, we've got to have these attitudes, get ourselves ready. I promise you, when you do. When I change my approach, because I'm fair enough, I started me this, oh, you did that wrong, that's not right, get it together. Right? Anyone else like that? Okay, it's just me. The rest of you are lying. I get it. The point. But I've got that side of me, right, that wants to just put you in your place, tell you what you've done wrong. Now, God's dealt with that. I'm only like that occasionally with my children, my wife. But the point is, or a customer service agent that's treating me bad. Here's the point. I've had to learn, no. That's the humility of a child is the first requirement. The tenacity of a shepherd is the second requirement. But it goes on, right? I remember, and I may have told this story in a different context, but I remember, our church in Australia was a mega church in our city. And there was another church that we had planted that became a mega church as well. And the leader of that church was my old youth pastor. Great guy when I worked with him, but in my opinion, it might have been wrong, he was becoming very competitive to us for no reason. We wanted to work with them, they didn't want to work with us. And then all these things would go on, right? And so in the end, I'm like, okay, I want to teach him what's up. That's not the Bible, unfortunately. So have I got the attitude of a child? Maybe of a teenager right now. Maybe an angry young adult. No, I haven't. So I had to humble myself, pray it through till the angst in me had gone and the heart of reconciliation had come to the surface. We haven't been given the ministry of telling people off. We've been given the ministry of reconciliation. That's the ministry of the Christian. That's what says. He said, anyone can love their friends, but he says, I say to you, you love your enemies. That's what shows you're a real Christian, not the other stuff. All the crying and the shunda-bubbering, none of that will actually prove you're a great Christian. But your humility and your love is what proves that you're from God. Make sense? So I went to this guy, and and this is going to come into my how-tos in a moment. I'm going to get to the how-tos real quick, and that is, I went to this guy and I thought it through, and I'd done all the things I'm about to tell you to do. So I'd written down what I was going to say. I'd strategized my approach. This was a really important conversation, so I'm not just going to wing it. And that's unfortunately what most of us do in conversations. We've not thought about it. We've not absorbed what their opinion is. We've not, given it the weight that it deserves. We just go in because we've been upset by something. that produces more upset. It doesn't produce peace. It may even subdue them, but it doesn't produce lasting unity. And so I'm like, okay, I'm writing it down, I'm praying through it. Okay, God, I don't want to come across as arrogant. I don't want to, I respect his position. I really do respect people in those positions. He's older than me, so I respect that too. So what am I going to do? And so God gave me a strategy. And literally, I brought another pastor into the room because I wanted them to be a witness and also to be safe for him, not safe for me. I was good. And he was good too. He can run a good fight too, don't worry. So we come in the room, and I'd been praying about this, and then the Holy Spirit said, do this. I've been praying, I've been writing. Keep to the facts. Don't get into extemporaneous analog and conversation about this. Just stick to the issues. The biggest weakness of most people in conversations is getting dragged into red herring conversations. And that's where the fight takes place, all right? So, I went in there, and I was sitting on the chair opposite, and I just said to him, I said, listen, I just wanted us to get together because I know you have a heart for the state, and I have a heart for the state. And we've got all of these pastors that are looking at us as the leaders. We're both on the state executive. I think I was the president at that point. He had been the president. I'm now the president. And I said to him, look, I don't know what it is that I'm doing that's frustrating you. But I want to say, I'm really sorry, because the thing that I want is for Jesus to be glorified and there to be unity. I got off my chair, never done this before or done this since. I got off my chair and I knelt at his feet, and I held his feet. And I said, I just want you to forgive me for the things that you may have heard that I've said or that you may think I feel. I just want to forgive you. I want today to be a new start. Tears are running down my face. I put myself into a humble position. And the result was amazing. Right? I didn't win the points of argument. I won a person. So if you're on a debating team, sure, win a point. But if you're not on a debating team, it's a marriage, win the person. Right? And I had to be careful because I'm a good debater. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. Very good debater. But it doesn't work. Except to win the point, it doesn't win the person. So can you see how that was very humbling for me to do? Not easy for me to do. But when the goal is bigger than my reputation, it's easy to do for the sake of the kingdom. It's easy to do for all those pastors that are going, do I follow him or do I follow him? No, you follow us. That was just one. There's many, many of these scenarios that have happened in my life. Then, the next attitude in Matthew 18. Let's read out first of all the verse before we put up the picture. It says this: if your brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault. We're glad to do that. You do that wrong. That's not what it's saying. Just between the two of you. No gossip, no talking to someone else. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along. We think that taking the one or two others along is to be the jury in this whole deal. That's not what it is. Taking others along, the only people you take along to that kind of environment are people that want peace. People that actually are biblically based, Christians with no motive of anger or angst or whatever in their heart. Their job is to make sure both of you stay on track. Make sense? They're not there to back you up. Yeah, I've got two witnesses as well, so you say you're a dirtbag. That's not what the scripture is telling us. It's about reconciliation. And if they will not listen, take one or two others, so every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. I've done this a few times. And I always bring in somebody, when it gets to that level, someone who's actually on the other person's side. Here's the thing. I don't feel a lack of safety for myself. And I certainly don't want them to say there was a power dynamic and that I had the powerful position. So I bring in somebody that I know but is their friend, let's say, so that they have a support. I don't need it. Does it make sense? Okay. So step 1, just the two of you in private, humble, direct. Step 2, bring one or trusted people not to gang up, help find the way through. Right? The brother. What's the third attitude? The third attitude is of a brother. Let's have a look at what a brother is. A brother, and I've got a brother, so I know, a brother is somebody that will keep going until it's resolved. When my brother and I have a discussion or a debate or something, it's a, knock down, drag him out kind of moment. Neither of us will stop till it's stopped. What does that tell you? That tells you that you have a tenacity to resolve it. Brothers will resolve it. My brother and I have done this, and we've had conflicts because we're both leaders and we're both brothers. But we've resolved them, and we've got better at resolving them, and we're best friends today because we refuse to allow something to stay the way it was. Make sense? The attitude of a brother is we're going to make it. We're going to wrestle this out. That's the attitude of a brother. Stay in the conversation, right? And you've got to ask yourself the question, am I prepared to stay in this longer than one conversation? My brother and I have done that. There was a time where we were divided, where there was an issue. It didn't really involve him and I. It involved the people attached to him or to me. And so we had to fight through that. We had to humble ourselves, And in that relationship, I won't tell you about that relationship, it's good. But it's fantastic because we refused to give up till it was resolved. Not saying you could always do that, but that's it. And the last one is the attitude of a servant. What does Peter say to Jesus? He comes to Jesus and he says, listen, how many times do I have to forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. I love that. And 490 isn't what he's talking about. It's not even 40, 70 times. 70. Anyway, I got it wrong. Did I? Maybe. I'll have to check it later. Right, 490? Yeah, I thought it was. 409 times in one day, everybody. One flipping day. Good luck. And what does Jesus then respond to Peter by saying? Remember, this is all in the context of bringing resolution to family disputes, personal disputes, marriage disputes. What does he say? The attitude of a servant. What is the attitude of a servant? The attitude, let's set that picture up again. Servant is this, is that a servant has no rights. The servant has no rights to hold on to anything. And then Jesus tells him a story about a man that was forgiven a huge debt. You can put that slide up. A man who was forgiven a huge debt and then wouldn't forgive the other guy. So he was forgiven $10 million, that's used money, and he pushed the guy into jail for owing him $20. And Jesus makes the point, you have been forgiven $10 million. You've been given infinite more, an eternity worth of sin, an eternity worth of separation, and you're going to hold that little thing against your brother? How dare you? He said, you're going to be put into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? Because he's saying, you need to understand, the kingdom thrives on love. The devil thrives on conflict. The more conflict, the more of the devil involved. Hiding conflict, the more of the devil. Resolving conflict, more of Jesus. And when we conquer that conflict, we come out, our marriages are better, our relationships are better, and guess what happens then? We become a testimony to the world about Jesus. Because they could have never done that. And so that's why we need to be very, very careful about how we do that. Now, we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to do it next week. But I'll give you the 4 things that you have to do really quickly if you're going to prepare yourself for conflict. Ready? Number 1 is the word prepare. And here it is up on the screen. Let's just look at this. It'll help us give us a word picture that's clear. So you need to identify the triggers in your life. When he says that or she says that, you're going to trigger. All right? I've got to lay them down. Lay down your cruise missiles. Lay down your nuclear weapons. Baggage and resentments. Lay down pride and clear your conscience. You need to go to Jesus first and say, hey, there's something in me that's wicked, something in me that's prideful, something in me that's not ready. I've got to have all that gone before I have the conversation. Then I've got to plan and practice. I do this, by the way. I don't read off a script because that would not work. But I have rehearsed in my mind. I lie in my bed, I'll write notes. Okay, if I say that, I'll even practice saying it out loud. Ooh, that stings. No, I don't going to use that. So how many times, put up your hand if you've been in a conversation, you said something that you didn't mean to antagonize the other person, but the other person got really antsy about it, right? Really got reacted to it. It's because you didn't practice what it sounds like. You just didn't hear it sounds fine. But when you hear it, does it sound okay, right? So I've got to rehearse. I write down, and this is what I'm very careful to do. I never go outside of, I try not to be sucked into going out of bounds down rabbit trails. Remembering something happened 25 years ago and we start talking about that. Not going to go there, right? I go there first. I might have 2 or 3 conversations in the end, but I just go there to get my conscience cleared in front of that person. So I keep to the facts. I do not stray into commentary. I keep to the facts that we can agree on. Here's what I realized in an argument. When you go to let me use the example. If you go to a court of law and you've done something wrong, the DA only has to prove you've done one thing wrong for you to be convicted. Right? So, you know what I mean? So it's like you're trying to present something that has no ability to be utilized to prosecute further. But you're also being warm, generous, and open. Hard thing to learn, but you've got to learn it. Right? Play out scenarios and rehearse what you will say. Prepare responses. Okay? And don't let your mind go into, if they say this, I'll say that. And if they say that, I'm going to say this. No. If they say that, I'm going to block it. And we're going to go back to the thing. Hey, we can talk about that later, but I'm really here to talk about this. Okay? Number 3, focus on the request. Know what you want. Turn grievances into requests. Focus on rebuilding, not accusing. Clear request. Right? And the clear request in the first conversation is not about, I want you to be a better wife. I want you to be more attentive to my needs. It's not a request like that, that's a demand. What you're trying to do is this. What is the point of this whole conversation? The point of this whole conversation is to get everybody to put their weapons down. All the missiles, all the guards off. Heart to heart, we're trying to get everybody to dismantle their weaponry. And so that's how I make my requests. I keep to the Bible. I keep to those things. Then there's a second conversation, which we'll talk about next week. Okay, and then the last one is set the stage and timing. Choose the right time. Prepare to ask for forgiveness first. The person who's boldest and bravest is the person who humbles themselves to ask for forgiveness. Because there is no way in a conversation and in a relationship that one person is all right, the other person's all wrong. There's just no way. You may have rose-colored glasses on and see it that way. It's just not true. So if you can go, okay, introspectively, what did I do? I shouldn't have said that. I remember confronting somebody one day and having a conflict conversation where I had done something very little, right? And I had made a massive thing of it. So I didn't go in and agree to things that I hadn't done, but I certainly was convicted by my tone when they went after Pastor Jane and I went after them. I was convicted that that was the wrong tone for me to have with them and the wrong things to say. So when I went into the conversation, my only goal was to say sorry for how I responded. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to take away their ability to blame me for not resolving what God's asking them to resolve. So I'm clearing the plate. Please forgive me. Is there anything else that I've done that has been so offensive to you that you've held it, because I would love you to tell me, because I want this to work. How we started this was so amazing. And it's obvious that I've done things, and I just want to ask for your forgiveness. The humble person who goes first has the upper hand. Right? You might not feel like it, but I promise you, you're the winner when it's all said and done. Then, out of that, you pray. So first of all, you want to write 4 P's. Prepare, pray. We'll talk more about that next week. And this is what you've got to say in your prayer. Let's have that thing up on that screen. This is what you've got to go in with. God, I am willing to lose X, Y, Z to win this person back. What are you willing to lose to fix this relationship? You've got to ask that question. I'm willing to lose X, Y, Z to get this. Okay? Then third thing, which we'll talk a lot more about next week, is persuade. If you can't persuade, you are in trouble. Persuasion is a very, very important part of this whole thing. Not being a sleazy communicator, being a persuader. We'll talk about all that. I've changed my approach to some of my kids because I realized those approaches weren't working. So I repented of all those approaches, though they thought they were appropriate. The child, who's a young man, didn't think they were appropriate. So I'm happy to change my approach. So what do? Not blame him, but at the end of it, what we did was I persuaded him that I needed to change, and then if he would do such and such, that would help me. If you can do that, it's my fault, my responsibility, but if you can do it that way, would you be able to? And you know what? 99 times out of 100, it's able to be resolved. Sometimes it needs to be one step after the other and 20 steps for it to get it finished. I want to pray for you. I'm going to hand over to Pastor Ryan. I know we're going deep into this stuff, but let me tell you something. I want you to have the best relationships of your life. My relationships with the people that matter are not perfect, but they're joyful. They're productive. I get slammed because that's the negotiation things that we've set in place. And I try to change. Even this week, my wife said to me some things and I'm like, okay, well, how do I change it? I've been doing that for 20 years. How do I change it? And I figured out a way to change it. Because what was happening was my response to something that she would say in certain circumstances created in her a negative feeling because I would do it very often, not even meaning to. Just without getting into the details, I'm like, okay, how do I change that so that that response doesn't trigger that other response? I'm not trying to trigger anything. I was just being me, but now I've got to change me to make sure that our harmony, which is always fantastic, keeps on growing and it doesn't die as we get older.